The region didn't fall in a single day. It collapsed in layers. First the radios went quiet, then the roads, then the clinics. Power flickered and didn't return. Schools closed. The market stalls disappeared. What remained was fear with a flag draped over it. By the time the briefing reached the team room, the photos were already weeks old. But the violence in them was timeless. Smoke columns curling above neighborhoods, bodies stacked in alleys like warnings, men with rifles standing over kneeling civilians as if cruelty was a kind of law. Commander Harris, Hawk, Mallory stared at the screen without blinking. He had been in the teams long enough to recognize the pattern: a vacuum, a warlord, a propaganda campaign. Then the slow rot of everyone pretending it wasn't happening until it was too late to ignore. He tapped the remote, and the images changed. A map, a valley, a city by a river, boxed in by ridgelines. "This is Kandahar province," the intel officer said. Local government collapsed. Hostile forces seized key infrastructure and started purge operations. Nobody in the room asked what purge operations meant. They already knew. The officer clicked again. Satellite imagery of checkpoints, roadblocks, looted compounds. A grainy photo of a man with a beard and calm eyes, surrounded by armed men. Warlord name is Zahir al-Khalif. The officer continued. He's consolidating power. He's got foreign advisors. He's moving weapons through the region, and he's publicly executing anyone who resists. He has to be removed. Hawk's jaw tightened. "We're the scalpel." "Yes," the officer said. "But the infection spread. This isn't one strike and out." The room was silent, tight, and focused. Around the table sat 6 men who had lived in silence longer than they'd lived in normal conversation. Senior Chief Ryan Rook, Callahan, broad shoulders, steady eyes. Petty Officer Doc Alvarez, medic, hands that didn't shake. LTJG Mace, Tanaka, EOD, patient and skeptical. Jester and Dune, 2 operators who finished each other's sentences without realizing it. And at the far end of the table, leaning against the wall as if she didn't want to be part of anyone's mythology, was Chief Petty Officer Evelyn Wraith Keene. Wraith didn't speak during briefings unless she had to. She didn't wear anything that drew attention. No charm. No performance. If you didn't know who she was, you might think she was just another quiet operator in a dark room. If you did know, you understood why the air felt different when she was there. Hawk looked at her for half a second, then back to the screen. "Phase 1, the officer said. "Insert, identify Khalif's command location, remove leadership, collapse their internal comms, create space for local forces to retake." Hawk nodded. "And Phase 2? The officer hesitated. "Containment, stabilization, extraction of key civilians from the kill list." Rook's voice was flat. "We're not leaving this place after one night." "No," the officer admitted. "This is going to take time." Wraith finally spoke, voice quiet enough that people leaned in without meaning to. "Time means patterns," she said. "Patterns mean ambushes." Hawk's eyes flicked to her. "You see something?" Wraith didn't point at the screen. She didn't need to. "They've set the valley," she said. "They'll force movement into predictable lanes. They'll use civilians as fog. We'll be invisible until we aren't." The officer swallowed. "We have ISR support. Drones. Overwatch." Wraith's mouth twitched. Not a smile, not quite. "Overwatch sees what it's allowed to see." That was all she said. The briefing moved on. Hawk listened, signed, and dismissed the team. When everyone stood, stretching joints and checking gear lists, Hawk walked to Wraith and kept his voice low. "You good?" he asked. Wraith met his eyes. Hers were calm, but there was something under it, like cold water under thin ice. "Same as always," she said. Hawk nodded once. "Stay close." Wraith's gaze didn't shift. "I never leave." They inserted under cloud cover. A black rotor silhouette against a darker sky, the helicopter flying low enough that the mountains could hide it from distant eyes. The air inside the cabin was loud and quiet at once. Engine vibration rattling through ribs, but no one speaking. Only hand signals, nods, and the occasional glance. Wraith sat opposite Hawk with her rifle case strapped between her boots. The case looked ordinary. Everything she carried looked ordinary. That was the point. The helicopter flared, then hovered. Rope dropped. The first man went out without hesitation. Hawk went second. Rook followed, then Doc, then Mace, then the last two. Wraith went last. She didn't hesitate either. She simply moved, sliding down rope into darkness like she'd been born in it. They hit the ground and dispersed immediately. No clumping, no silhouette, no noise. The valley air was cold, dry, and wrong. It smelled faintly of burning plastic and diesel, the scent of a city that had been turned into a machine. Hawk led the team through a dry gully toward the outer edge of town. They moved in a staggered formation, scanning windows, rooftops, ridgelines. Every few minutes, Wraith peeled off into the shadows, climbing higher, always a few beats ahead, always watching. Their target was a command post rumored to be operating inside an old municipal building near the river. Intel said Khalif's advisors met there at night. Intel also said the building was guarded heavily, with layered checkpoints. Intel, as always, was only as good as the last person who cared about truth. They reached the city edge near dawn. And then everything went wrong. It started with a sound that didn't belong. A single, distant click, like a switch. Doc froze instantly. His hand lifted in a silent warning. Rook's eyes narrowed, scanning. Hawk raised his fist. The team stopped. The city breathed around them. Distant dogs barking, a generator humming, the low thrum of voices somewhere far away. Then a second click. Then a third. Mace's head tilted slightly. He wasn't listening for voices. He was listening for math, spacing, pattern, the hidden logic of explosives. His face tightened. Trip line, he mouthed without sound. Hawk's hand signaled retreat. Too late. The first blast wasn't lethal. It was loud, an earth punch that threw dust and gravel into the air. It collapsed the gully behind them, cutting off the clean path they'd used. It forced them forward. The second blast hit closer, shattering a wall, throwing shards of concrete like knives. The ambush opened with gunfire from three directions. Ridge line, rooftops, alley mouth. The SEALs dove into cover that didn't exist, returning fire toward muzzle flashes that blinked like angry stars. Hawk's world narrowed to the essentials. Targets, angles, teammates, survival. Contact, Rook yelled, and his voice was swallowed by noise. Doc dragged a wounded man behind a low wall. Jester, hit in the thigh, blood dark against dust. Another man dropped, rolling, clutching his shoulder. Mace shouted something about a secondary device, his hands already moving toward a pouch. Hawk fired in controlled bursts, trying to break one firing line. But the enemy had built this kill zone with patience. Every exit was covered. Every movement was punished. Within 2 minutes, Hawk realized the truth. They weren't being attacked to be killed. They were being attacked to be stopped. Pinned. Held. As if the enemy wanted them right here for a reason. Hawk's radio crackled. Static. A half-heard voice. Then nothing. Communications were jammed. He glanced up at the ridge. Where was Wraith? He didn't see her. And the absence hit like cold water down his spine. Because if Wraith wasn't firing, it meant one of two things. She was dead. Or she was waiting. Waiting was worse. Waiting meant something bigger. A round snapped into the wall beside Hawk's head, chipping stone. He ducked, heart hammering, hearing Doc shout, "We've got multiple 300s. Injured, bleeding, losing mobility." Rook crawled next to Hawk, face tight. "We're getting boxed." Hawk nodded once. "I know." "Extraction?" Rook asked, not hopeful. Hawk looked at the sky. Daylight was creeping in. Daylight meant they'd be seen. Daylight meant the enemy could tighten the net. He shook his head. Not yet. A burst of gunfire ripped through the alley mouth, forcing them to hug the wall tighter. Jester screamed as pain spiked. Doc pressed a bandage hard, his hands working like machines. "I can't keep them moving like this," he yelled. Hawk looked at his team. 6 men, for still combat effective, 2 wounded enough that movement would be slow. And the enemy had them in a funnel with ridges like teeth. Send help, someone muttered. Maybe Dune, maybe Jester. Not a request. A reflex. Hawk didn't repeat it. He couldn't afford to. The radio was dead anyway. He lifted his head just enough to see the ridge line. Nothing. Then, high above, a single crack split the air, different from the enemy's rapid bursts. Clean. Controlled. A man on the rooftop opposite jerked backward and disappeared. Another crack. A second silhouette dropped, sliding down the roofline like a puppet with its strings cut. For half a second, the enemy firing line faltered. Hawk's eyes widened. Rook's voice was low, stunned. That's her. Doc looked up, hope bleeding into his face. Wraith. Another shot. This time the bullet struck the wall near the enemy machine gun nest, sparking stone and forcing the gunner to flinch away. The machine gun stuttered, then stopped. The alley filled with a new kind of silence. The kind that happens when predators realize a bigger predator just entered the hunt. Hawk felt his pulse stabilize. He turned to his team, voice hard, commanding. Move. Now. They surged. Rook and Dune dragged Jester by his vest straps while Doc covered with controlled fire. Mace tossed a smoke canister not to hide, but to confuse. Hawk advanced in short bursts, using the moment Wraith had created. Above them, the ridge cracked again and again. 4 shots, 4 drops, each one precise, each one rewriting the battlefield. The enemy tried to respond. They fired upward, but the mountain swallowed their angles. They couldn't see her. They could only fear her. And fear made them sloppy. Hawk realized with a cold clarity. The battle wasn't over. But the outcome had changed. Because somewhere above, in the cold, thin air, Wraith was close enough to protect them, and far enough to be untouchable. Wraith had been in position for almost 40 minutes before the first shot. Long enough for the cold to seep through insulated layers and settle into muscle memory. Long enough for the valley to teach her its habits. The way sound bounced off stone, the way dust hung longer near the river, the way armed men walked when they believed they owned the ground beneath their boots. She lay prone on a shelf of rock no wider than a kitchen table, her body aligned with the mountain as if it had grown her there. From this height, the city looked smaller, less powerful, like something that could be corrected. She had seen the ambush forming before the team ever felt it. Not the explosives that had been clever, layered, meant to shape movement, but the patience behind it, the spacing of shooters, the way certain rooftops were occupied while others were conspicuously empty. A trap meant to hold, not to kill. When the first blast went off, Wraith didn't move. She watched. She watched the enemy reveal themselves, one muzzle flash at a time. She watched Hawk's team react exactly the way they had trained, disciplined, controlled, refusing to panic even as the net tightened. She counted. Targets. Angles. Priorities. She waited until the enemy believed the kill zone was sealed. Only then did she fire. The first man she dropped wasn't the most dangerous. He was the most confident, standing too upright on a rooftop, gesturing with his rifle like a baton as he shouted orders. Wraith took him through the upper chest, the round punching him backward into invisibility. The second target was a radio operator. She could tell by the way others kept glancing at him, by the wire trailing from his pack. That shot collapsed the enemy's coordination. The third and fourth were machine gunners. She didn't kill them outright. She shattered their cover instead, forcing them to reposition into angles Hawk's team could exploit. Wraith didn't rush. She sculpted the battlefield. Below, the SEALs moved like a single organism, dragging wounded, covering arcs, trusting something they couldn't see but could feel. Trust was currency in war. Wraith had earned it long before tonight. Hawk felt the change before he fully understood it. The enemy's fire lost rhythm. Bursts became irregular. Voices rose in confusion instead of command. He looked up again. Still couldn't see her. Didn't need to. She's walking them. Rook said between breaths. Hawk nodded. Use it. They advanced in bounding movements, Hawk covering while Rook and Dunehall gestured toward a collapsed storefront. Doc stayed low, his hands slick with blood, his jaw clenched as he kept pressure on wounds that would have killed less disciplined men. Multiple injuries, Doc yelled. We need time. You'll get it, Hawk said. Above them, Wraith shifted her rifle a few degrees left. A man tried to break from cover, sprinting toward a stairwell that led to the ridge. Wraith tracked him smoothly, leading the shot just enough that when he stumbled mid-stride, the bullet met him where he would be, not where he was. He went down hard, rolling once before stopping. Another man froze, crouched behind a car door, unsure whether to move or stay. Wraith let him live for now. Fear spread faster than bullets. The enemy adapted. They always did. Wraith saw it in the way a new figure appeared near the rear of the formation. Older, slower, not carrying a rifle like the others. He didn't fire. He watched. Command. He barked orders, pointing not at Hawk's team, but upward. Wraith felt it before the rounds arrived. A burst of heavy fire slammed into the rock face near her position, fragments spraying across her sleeve. She rolled, already moving, the mountain answering her with a growl as stone cracked under impact. They had spotted her general area. Not precise, but close enough to matter. Wraith slid behind a boulder and adjusted her pack, breathing slow. She had expected this. Every Overwatch position was temporary. Permanence was a myth. She keyed her throat mic. Hawk, she said calmly. They're shifting assets uphill. You've got maybe 3 minutes before they try to push you hard. Hawk's reply was immediate. Copy. We're moving. Wraith peeked out just long enough to put a round into the commander's leg, not a kill shot. A message. The man collapsed, screaming, clutching his thigh. His fighters hesitated. Wraith used the hesitation to relocate. She crawled backward, then slid down a narrow chute between rocks, controlling her descent with practiced precision. Her new position was lower, riskier, but it gave her a clean view of the compound's rear access road. And that's when she saw it. A vehicle, engines running. Not an armored truck. Something faster. Something meant to escape. Wraith's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about killing a few shooters anymore. This was about stopping the command cell from vanishing. She keyed the mic again. They're exfiling, she said. Rear road. White pickup, 2 escorts. Hawk swore under his breath. We're pinned with wounded. I know, Wraith replied. She adjusted her rifle. I'll handle it. Below, Hawk made a decision. One that would be debated in classrooms and armchairs if anyone ever knew it happened. Rook, he said, you take point with Dune. Get the wounded into that building. Defensive posture. Rook hesitated. And you? Hawk looked up at the ridge again, then back at his team. I'm going to make noise. Before anyone could argue, Hawk stepped out from cover and fired a full magazine into the alley mouth, drawing attention, forcing the enemy to focus downward. It worked. Rounds slammed into the wall around him, dust exploding in violent puffs. Hawk moved, fast and aggressive, making himself the problem. Above, Wraith took the shot. The lead escort driver never saw it coming. The round punched through the windshield and dropped him forward over the wheel. The vehicle swerved and slammed into a barrier, blocking the road. The second escort tried to reverse. Wraith fired again. The engine block erupted in smoke. The white pickup stopped. Men spilled out, scrambling for cover. Wraith breathed once. Then she went to work. Each shot was deliberate. No wasted motion. No heroics. She removed drivers, not shooters. Legs, not torsos. Chaos, not massacre. The escape dissolved. Below, Hawk's gambit paid off. With the enemy's attention split, Rook's team dragged the wounded into the building, barricading doors, establishing fields of fire. Doc collapsed next to Jester, panting, hands shaking now that the immediate crisis had passed. They're stable, he said. For now. Hawk slid in last, breath ragged, eyes scanning. We're still not out. Outside, the enemy regrouped. They hadn't been defeated. They'd been embarrassed. And embarrassment bred brutality. Hawk keyed his radio again. Static. Then, Wraith, a crackle. Her voice. They're consolidating. This isn't over. Hawk leaned against the wall, adrenaline fading into bone-deep fatigue. No, he said quietly. It's not. He looked at his team, bleeding, exhausted, but alive. Hold, he ordered. She bought us this ground. We keep it. Above, Wraith lay behind her rifle, watching the valley tighten its fists again. The night wasn't done with them. Neither was she. The valley changed tone. It wasn't the sound of engines or shouted orders that signaled it. Those had been there all along. It was the pause between them. The moment when even the reckless stopped firing and began repositioning with intent. Wraith felt it immediately. Her scope swept the outskirts of the compound, catching movement that didn't belong to militia chaos. These men didn't bunch. They didn't shout. They moved in short, efficient bursts, weapons low, heads turning in coordinated arcs. Professionals. She exhaled slowly. The enemy had stopped trying to win the fight quickly. Now they were trying to finish it clean. Wraith keyed her mic. Hawk. You've got trained elements inbound. Different movement. Different discipline. There was a pause. Then Hawk's voice, strained but steady. Copy. Numbers. Hard to say. Enough. She adjusted her bipod, knowing what that meant. Enough meant they were done playing. Inside the building, Hawk watched the doorway while Rook and Dune reinforced a makeshift barricade with shelving and debris. Doc knelt beside Jester and Mace, his gloves soaked, his jaw clenched. They're stable, Doc repeated, though his eyes betrayed the truth. Stable was a word that depended on time, and time was something they were bleeding out with every breath. Mace looked up from his position near the window. We're not holding this place if they push with numbers. Hawk nodded. I know. Rook wiped sweat and grime from his face. We need extraction. Hawk didn't answer right away. He keyed his radio again, cycling frequencies, forcing himself to believe someone was listening. Viper Actual, this is Ghost 6. Request immediate CAS or fast rope extract. Multiple wounded. Pinned in urban terrain. Static. Then, faint, distorted but real. Ghost 6, standby, airspace contested. The signal died. Hawk lowered the radio slowly. We're on our own, he said. No one argued. Above them, Wraith shifted positions again. The trained elements were spreading, using cover intelligently, sending small teams uphill to pressure her position. They weren't charging. They were hunting. She dropped one of the climbers with a round through the shoulder, forcing him to tumble back down the slope. She let the second reach cover, tracking him through the scope, letting the tension build. Then she fired. The man slumped, weapon sliding from his hands. But Wraith knew the math. Every shot she took bought seconds. Seconds were running out. She checked her ammo, still enough. Checked her wind, still manageable. Checked her route. Narrow, steep, unforgiving. If they cut her off from the ridgeline, she would be pinned alone. And if she went silent, Hawk's team would feel it immediately. Wraith had faced death before. Plenty of times. But this wasn't about dying. This was about timing. She keyed the mic again. Hawk, I'm going to shift. You're going to lose my fire for maybe 30 seconds. Hawk's voice came back instantly. Negative. Not a request, Wraith said calmly. I'll come back louder. Hawk closed his eyes for half a beat. We'll be ready. The enemy push came fast. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions at once, disciplined bursts hammering the building's exterior. Windows shattered inward, glass spraying across the floor. Dust filled the air. Contact left. Dune yelled. Rook fired back through a narrow gap, his shots controlled, precise. Hawk moved between firing positions, shouting corrections, keeping the team from fracturing under pressure. Outside, boots pounded closer. They're stacking, Mace shouted. Hawk felt the clock collapse. He grabbed a grenade, thumbed the pin, waited. A shadow crossed the doorway. Hawk tossed. The explosion slammed through the entryway, blowing the door inward and sending bodies tumbling back into the alley. The blast bought them breath, but not much. "Reload," Hawk barked. Then, silence. Not complete, just different. The pressure on the building eased. No incoming fire. No shouted orders. Rook frowned. What the hell? A single crack split the air. Then another. Then three more, rapid but measured. Wraith was back. From a lower angle now. Her rounds punched into the enemy's flank, shredding the assault element just as it tried to regroup. One man dropped. Another stumbled. A third dove for cover that no longer mattered. Wraith moved with the shots, firing, shifting, firing again, never letting the enemy pin her down. She was closer now. Close enough that the enemy could hear the difference in her rifle. Close enough that fear had a voice. Below, Hawk seized the moment. "Move," he roared. Bound left. Now, they surged from the building in a staggered rush, dragging wounded, laying down covering fire, exploiting the hole Wraith had torn open. Bullets snapped past them, but fewer now. Sloppier. The enemy had lost cohesion. For the first time since the ambush began, Hawk believed something dangerous. They might actually get out. Wraith felt the recoil bite into her shoulder as she fired her last shot from that position. The enemy was breaking, not routing, but hesitating, unsure where death would come from next. She didn't wait for confirmation. She moved, sliding down the slope, cutting across rocks. Keeping low, she repositioned again, closer to the team's escape route. Her breathing was steady, her movements economical, but the strain was there now. The cold, the climb, the constant tension. She reached a final perch overlooking the street Hawk's team was moving through. And that's when she saw it. A heavy vehicle, armored, rolling in from the far end of the road, turret swiveling, barrel searching. Wraith swore under her breath. That vehicle would end everything. She keyed the mic. "Hawk, you've got armor inbound. 2 minutes, maybe less." Hawk looked up the street and saw it too. His stomach dropped. They couldn't outrun it. They couldn't fight it. An extraction was still a prayer, not a promise. Hawk looked at his team, at Doc's supporting Jester, at Rook limping but still moving, at Mace clutching his pack. He made the call. "Wraith," he said, "if you've got something left, now's the time." Above him, Wraith didn't hesitate. She adjusted her rifle, dialed down her magnification, and aimed, not at the turret, not at the armor, at the driver's viewport. Wind, distance, angle. She breathed in, held, fired. The round punched through reinforced glass and into the man behind it. The vehicle swerved violently, smashing into a wall, turret firing wildly before going silent. Smoke poured from the engine. The street froze. Hawk stared, stunned. Then he laughed once, sharp and breathless. "You did it." Wraith didn't reply. She was already moving again, slipping away from the perch, disappearing into the maze of stone and shadow as enemy fire raked her former position. Her job was done. Now she just had to survive long enough to leave. The helicopter was late. Not by minutes, by moments. The kind of delay that didn't show up in reports, only in memories. The kind that decided who went home and who became a name whispered in bars and team rooms. Hawk heard it before he saw it. The low, chopping thrum rolled over the rooftops, uneven and distant at first, then clearer, heavier, rotors biting thin air. He lifted his head and felt something loosen in his chest that had been clenched for too long. "Birds coming," he said, voice hoarse. Rook nodded, eyes scanning. "I hear it." Doc tightened his grip on Jester's harness. "If they circle, we're done." "They won't," Hawk said, though he didn't know if it was true. They pushed into a narrow street that opened toward the river, the planned exfil point marked by a half-collapsed bridge and a stretch of open ground that felt like a firing range waiting to happen. Smoke drifted low, mixing with dust and the metallic tang of burned engines. Above them, the helicopter broke through cloud cover, black silhouette against gray sky, doors open, gunners already leaning out, scanning. "Ghost 6, this is Viper 2-1, The pilot's voice crackled through Hawk's headset. "We've got eyes. We're hot." Hawk keyed the mic. "Copy. Multiple wounded. LZ is contested." A pause. Then, "Understood." The helicopter dipped, and the valley answered. Gunfire erupted from the outskirts, sporadic at first, then concentrated. Tracers stitched the air, red lines clawing toward the bird. The door gunner answered immediately, the roar of the minigun tearing through the noise, forcing heads down and buying seconds. Seconds were everything. Hawk waved the team forward. "Go." They ran. Rook and Dune half-carried Jester, boots slipping on rubble. Doc stayed tight, one hand on a wounded shoulder, the other ready to catch anyone who fell. Mace covered the rear, firing short bursts to keep the enemy honest. The helicopter flared over the LZ, hovering just above ground. The rope dropped. "Now!" Hawk shouted. Rook grabbed the rope and hauled Jester in a practiced rhythm. Up, clip, up. Doc followed, pushing another wounded man into the doorway before turning back. Hawk scanned the ridge line, heart hammering. "Wraith," he said into the mic, "birds down." No answer. Gunfire intensified, the enemy emboldened by proximity. A round snapped past Hawk's ear, close enough that he felt the heat of it. "Come on," he muttered. Above, the gunner screamed something unintelligible and poured fire into a cluster of movement near the bridge. Bodies scattered. Still no Wraith. 30 seconds, the pilot called. Hawk's chest tightened. Wraith moved through the wreckage like a rumor. She'd left her last firing position before the echo faded, slipping downhill through a cut between buildings, then across a narrow rooftop where the wind tore at her balance. She didn't run blindly. She measured angles, lines of sight, the way sound carried. The enemy had learned. They weren't chasing her in a rush anymore. They were setting pieces, cutting off routes, forcing her toward predictable exits. Predictable was deadly. Wraith dropped to a knee behind a low wall and listened. Boots on stone. A shouted order. The metallic click of a magazine being seated. She waited. The first man rounded the corner and froze, just long enough for Wraith to fire once and drop him. The second dove back, yelling. Wraith didn't stay. She never stayed. She moved again, cutting left, then right, then up, using the city's broken spine to stay one step ahead. The helicopter's roar grew louder. Closer. Wraith smiled, just a fraction. Then she saw the problem. A heavy machine gun emplacement had been dragged into position near the LZ, set behind a truck that had been turned into cover. The gunner was waiting, not firing yet, conserving ammo, watching the bird, waiting to finish the job. Wraith's smile vanished. If that gun opened up, the helicopter wouldn't hover long enough to lift off. The wounded would be stranded. Hawk's gamble would collapse. She checked her ammo. Enough for one solution. She keyed her mic. "Hawk, you've got a heavy gun covering the LZ." "Copy," Hawk said, breathless. "Can you?" "Yes." She didn't explain. She never did. The machine gunner didn't see her at first. He was focused upward, tracking the helicopter's movement, finger resting on the trigger. Two other men crouched nearby, feeding the belt, shouting over the noise. Wraith lined up the shot. Distance wasn't ideal. Angle was steep. Wind was unpredictable. She fired anyway. The first round took the assistant in the neck. He dropped instantly, collapsing into the feed tray. The gunner jerked in surprise, swinging the barrel toward the sound. Wraith fired again. The round punched into the gunner's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He screamed, falling back against the truck. The third man scrambled for the gun. Wraith didn't give him time. The third shot hit the weapon itself, shattering the receiver and sending fragments outward. The gun went silent, useless. The LZ breathed. Wraith didn't. She was already moving, turning away from the emplacement just as return fire snapped toward her position. A round punched into the wall inches from her head, showering her with dust. She ran. Hawk saw the machine gun fall silent and knew. "That's her," Rook said from the helicopter door, eyes wide. Hawk keyed the mic. "Wraith, LZ is clear. Move now." I know, she replied, voice calm but tight. She burst from an alley into the open, sprinting toward the LZ, rifle slung tight, boots pounding broken concrete. The helicopter loomed ahead, door gaping like a promise. Then the valley tried to take her. A round slammed into the ground near her feet, throwing her forward. She rolled, came up, kept moving. Another round tore through her pack, shredding fabric and momentum. She felt a sharp impact in her side. Pain flared, bright, immediate. Wraith stumbled, caught herself, forced her legs to keep going. She could hear Hawk shouting her name now, raw and unfiltered. "Geo," the pilot yelled. "We're taking fire." Wraith reached the rope. Hands grabbed her, Rook's, Hawk's, hauling her upward with desperate strength. She clipped in automatically, muscle memory taking over even as pain threatened to steal her focus. The helicopter lurched, lifting hard, gunner firing non-stop as the ground dropped away. A round cracked through the air and slammed into the fuselage. Another hit the tail boom. The bird shuddered but held. Then they were rising, leaving the valley behind. Inside the helicopter, chaos settled into controlled breathing. Doc moved immediately, tearing open Wraith's vest, fingers probing. "She's hit," he said, voice steady. Sighed. Through and through. Wraith lay back against the bulkhead, eyes closed, breath shallow. "I'm fine," she muttered. Doc snorted. "You're terrible at lying." Hawk knelt beside her, helmet off, face streaked with grime. "You stayed," he said. Wraith opened one eye. "You would've." Hawk didn't argue. The helicopter banked away, the valley shrinking beneath them until it looked harmless. Quiet. Almost peaceful. Rook stared out the open door, shaking his head slowly. "They were done," he said. "If you hadn't shown up." Wraith didn't answer. She didn't need to. Hours later, back at a secure site far from the river and the ridges, the team sat in silence while medics worked. Wounded were stabilized. Gear was collected. Reports were started and abandoned mid-sentence. Someone brought coffee. No one drank it. Hawk stood at the edge of the hangar and watched the sunrise bleed into the sky. Rook joined him, leaning against a crate. "They'll talk about this," Rook said quietly. "In the teams." Hawk nodded. "They always do." "About her," Rook added. Hawk glanced toward the med bay, where Wraith lay on a gurney, eyes closed, chest rising and falling. "They can talk," Hawk said. "She won't." Rook smiled faintly. "No." Hawk looked back at the horizon. "She never does." The region stabilized. Not overnight. Not cleanly. But the execution stopped. The checkpoints vanished. The warlord's voice went quiet. Official statements credited local forces and international cooperation. No names were mentioned. In a team room months later, a new operator asked Hawk about the mission in Kandahar province. "Was it bad?" the kid asked. Hawk thought for a moment. Then he said, "It was close." The kid nodded, satisfied. Hawk didn't add anything else. Some legends didn't need words. They only needed survivors. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Epic Recon Stories. Here we tell the missions that never made the headlines, the decisions made in silence, and the people who carried them. More stories are coming soon.